Well, welcome everybody. I show that we're a minute past 1 o'clock, so I wanted to go ahead and open it up. We're expecting some others to hop on here. I know around our office it's a busy day, so certainly understand if people have gotten sidetracked. So I'm Shelley Johnson, basically available to answer questions. So I strongly encourage you to type in questions. I didn't plan a lot for this session. I wanted it to be more just open and available for Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in there, and we will try to monitor that as we go through the presentation. So what are some of the things that your businesses need to be doing now to hang on? Well, if you haven't done it, strongly encourage to apply for the payroll protection plan. The best success with getting those applications in seems to be happening through the local banks. So the Regions, the Keys, the Chase. I've heard of some smaller local banks in other states having some success as well. So if the bank that you use for your ongoing operations is participating, then I would encourage you to look at applying through them if you've not applied. And even if you have applied somewhere and it doesn't seem like it has moved any further, this opened up last Friday. So I know that depending on how the bank or the lender was doing it, they may have gone ahead and taken some of your actual information. But if you've not been contacted to move on through their process and it's been several days, I would encourage you to think about seeing if you've got another connection that would be able to support that application. I know we got one through yesterday through KeyBank, and then I just got a message before I hopped on here from a client who Key has said that they're holding off on moving those forward to the next step. So I know they're all overwhelmed. We also got an update on some Treasury information that they do have a request in to expand the dollars available for some of the programs. So again, there's still a lot of unknown, a lot of moving parts. Our understanding is it is truly based on the gross payroll dollars, the cost of state unemployment taxes that the employer pays, the cost that the employer pays for health insurance or for retirement type benefits. So if you have a program where you're doing a 3% match or something, it's the employer cost on those things. It is not including the 1099 subcontractor payments like they had initially said before. So again, please, if you've got particular questions on either the PPP, the payroll protection plan, drop those into the box, or if you have questions on the economic disaster loan. The economic disaster loan is the one that you apply for straight through the SBA website. Again, it's a fairly streamlined application. I would also encourage folks to consider applying for that as well. That is designed to cover some of the ongoing monthly operational expenses. There is supposed to be an initial $10,000 disbursement within a short period of time after that's approved. We're not hearing of that money moving yet. The website appears to be working with the SBA for that economic disaster loan, but we're not actually hearing of funds moving through that system. So I'm going to just go through a couple of other things that you'll want to be thinking about with your business during this time. So cash is king. You want to be thinking about what you can do to preserve cash. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Budgeting is important. You need to think about employees and how that's going to work, what you need to be doing with your payrolls. We'll talk a little bit more about how to look at your cash flow, your burn rate. If you do end up getting the PPP money, you want to be poised to track those expenses. And we'll also talk about some cloud technologies that are helpful as everybody becomes dispersed. And again, if a question pops up in the meantime, please feel free to put that into the chat. So we've talked about obtaining those SBA funds. If you have other resources, if you've got a business line of credit, you want to use that. You want to make sure that that's up to date. Your bankers are a little swamped right now, so give them some grace if they don't get back to you right away. But it's not necessarily that you need to use these funds. It's just having these funds available. What's your backup plan if it takes a while to get the SBA money, or for some reason SBA money doesn't come through? You want to look at ways that you can slow down on payables to consolidate your cash savings. And worst case scenario, there may be some opportunity if you've got some home equity financing. Another piece that's not listed on the slide, there's going to be some breaks if you need to tap into retirement money. We never want to see that happen, but if it is something that you just need to bridge some time with your business cash flow, there'll be some ways to get into that, potentially not incurring the type of penalties that we've seen in the past. So that's another way. Again, not an ideal plan on how to fund your business, but retirement may be an option as well. So what is your crisis budget? You want to look at critical cost. What are the things that aren't going to go away? What is considered fixed that continues versus variable? So if variable is going to be something that fluctuates based on your sales or your revenues. So for example, if by chance you're selling widgets and nobody's buying widgets right now, or the volume of widgets is going down, the cost of those widgets is variable because that's going to track with your sales. So we'll see this with fixed food costs, production costs, things along those lines. With your fixed cost, those are things regardless of what your revenue volume is, you still have that cost. And you want to be proactive on contacting your bank. If you've got installment agreements, see if there's means to defer those, stretch those out. Same thing on mortgages, loans, leases. Doesn't hurt to ask. It's okay to see what programs they're putting in place to give employers a little bit of grace. Now, I really didn't talk about payroll under critical cost. Same thing, you may have some payroll that is going to happen regardless of what your revenue volumes are, or you may have payroll that's going to fluctuate. So it's just trying to identify, what cash obligations are you going to have coming up down the road. So talking more about employees, if you've got a bigger organization, you're going to want to identify vital versus your non-vital folks. And understand, everybody's a little bit different. If you've basically been totally shut down, that's going to impact what's considered vital and what isn't. And you may want to spend a little bit of time with an employment attorney. If you're not sure who to ask, we can give you some names and some referrals. But there's important documentation and information that you need to follow if you are going to look at furloughs or layoffs or even unpaid time. Some places will simply do an across-the-board reduction in payroll. So maybe they're going to pay 75% of what they normally do. They can have a short-term unpaid time. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but I would recommend contacting an employment attorney or a resource you have through maybe an industry-specific resource on any potential landmines along that way. So talking more about your cash flow, the burn rate analysis, this is how fast you go through cash. And you're looking to see how long will the cash I have on hand last. So what do you have in the bank today? Is there any anticipated money coming in? What's the anticipated outflow, which we talked about those expenses earlier, to see what your ending cash is. And you can look at that and whatever timeline you want to. You may want to break it down weekly, or maybe monthly makes more sense for your particular situation. But you're looking at how fast you're going to go through that cash, and how long will the cash you have and the cash you have coming in sustain you before you're going to need to either make some drastic reduction in expenses or find some other sources of cash. So hopefully as we work through the payroll protection plan, people are going to start seeing some of that money flow in to help with this time crunch or cash crunch. And ideally, you want to be able to have as much of that payroll protection forgiven as possible. So qualified loan forgiveness expenses. As we know things today, the meter starts when you get the payroll protection funding, and it's looking 8 weeks. So from that date forward, the eligible costs are the costs that are incurred in that 8-week time frame. What's going to be eligible? It's gross payroll. It is if you have state unemployment taxes being paid during that time frame. Again, those tend to be paid on the first payroll of the year. So depending on how robust your payroll is, you may have already paid most of those for the year. If there's a pension match, that gets included in that payroll calculation as well. It's also the utilities. So if you have office space where you're paying utilities, it can include cell phone, and it can include internet as well. That is our understanding on the utilities piece. And then we think the forgiveness will also include your rent, or if you've got a mortgage loan, we think it's going to be the interest on the mortgage loan. There's not been clarity. I've seen it listed both ways. But worst case scenario, it'll simply cover the interest, which kind of makes sense because the principal payment, you're paying that back towards your own property. So those are the qualified loan forgiveness expenses that you're going to want to track, and we'll certainly be helping clients maneuver through that when we get to that point. So at a minimum, start a spreadsheet, or you may want to update your accounting system to tag those expenses accordingly. And then some of the cloud connected technologies that have been helpful. Obviously video conferencing, Zoom. We're using a Zoom webinar to have a little bit more security, but you can also do Zoom meetings. I do encourage you to lock down a meeting once it's started and everybody's in the group. Or there's also ways to have waiting rooms and passwords on those type of things. Unfortunately, there's people with too much time on their hands that have been doing some what they call Zoom bombing. Very inappropriate. If you were on our first webinar, you got to see that live and in action. So if you are using Zoom, just be prepared to beef up the security a little bit on that. Internal communications, a lot of people are using Microsoft Teams now. It's a great way. If you've been around a while, you remember when instant messaging first came out. It's kind of the corporate version of that. So Teams works well. In our office, we've used Slack Slack came along before Teams, and we're kind of used to it. So we've actually, each morning, everybody gets on the same call on Slack, and we do a quick touch point to make sure nobody's stuck on any projects that they're working on. So again, Teams and Slack tend to be the most popular for internal communications to move things out of emails and texting. Some of our favorite cloud-based accounting, the QuickBooks Online, you can get to it anywhere, anytime. Or there's also ways to have, if you prefer the desktop QuickBooks, there's ways to actually have that hosted. There's specific companies that are approved for hosting the QuickBooks desktop version, so it puts it in the cloud as well. Whatever technology you use, make sure that you are using the two-factor authentication. And they used to say that you would want to change your passwords frequently. It's not so much changing the passwords, it's having a longer phrase. This morning I heard that your password should be a phrase or a series of words that cover at least 12 characters, and that is good security. As far as working from home, if you're able to wire in direct to your internet provider, that's going to give you better security than the wireless routers. You want to make sure that you're keeping your router firmware up to date and you're not using the default password that came with that. If you are updating firmware from your home computer, you want to make sure that you're actually on the legitimate brand site so that you don't land in something where the fraudsters are watching what you're doing. And then those that are actually working from home should be the ones working on the main router, and everybody else, the gaming and the personal devices, should be set up using the guest version of the home internet. That's from information that I was listening to on my drive-in from one of my favorite webcasts or podcast, and that's pretty much the extent of my technology knowledge. So don't ask me those type of questions, but I'll be glad to answer tax and accounting questions. So we've gone through a couple different things. Didn't get into anything real technical this time around, but just wanted to be available. And I'll give you a second here to make sure nobody has any specific questions that we want to cover. But we appreciate everybody taking time to hop on today, and hopefully we've given a little bit of guidance. It's still interesting. I'm not really hearing exactly when stimulus checks are going to come out. That's going to be the next thing with the IRS. So sit tight on those if you're eligible for a stimulus check at the individual level. And feel free to contact us with any additional questions or concerns. We're scattered. Some of us are in the office and some of us are working remote. So it may take a little while to get back to you, but we're certainly here every day and available to follow up and answer questions as needed. So thank you very much, and you folks have a great day.